The night was colder than usual, the kind of cold that made steel groan and electronics hum a little louder. In a fortified control center buried beneath layers of concrete somewhere outside Kyiv, the air was thick with anticipation. Screens glowed blue, displaying lines of code and maps scattered with pulsing signals. It was Operation Horizon, a mission shrouded in secrecy, whispered about only in corridors guarded by biometric locks. At the center of it sat Captain Danilo Petrenko, a drone engineer turned strategist, staring at the feed from 200 unmanned aerial systems that waited for command. Each one was no larger than a car door, sleek, silent, and armed only with sensors, jammers, and cameras. Their target was not a base to be destroyed, but a network, a Russian nuclear facility whose communications grid had long been considered impenetrable. The goal was to test, confuse, and expose weaknesses, not to strike. For months, intelligence had suggested that Russia's northern nuclear research complex had ramped up operations, and Ukraine's Defense Council wanted to send a message, not of aggression, but of capability. As the clock struck 02 am, Petrenko leaned forward, his hands clasped. "Initiate swarm protocol." A low mechanical hum filled the underground room. On the radar map, hundreds of green dots began to lift from hidden launch pads scattered across the Ukrainian countryside. In the distance, farmers who happened to be awake would later describe it as the sound of a rising storm, though no rain ever came. The drones ascended in coordinated arcs, each receiving encrypted data packets that guided them along invisible corridors through the night sky. Above the Carpathians, thin clouds refracted their navigation lights, creating a spectral shimmer that could be mistaken for stars. Inside the command center, analysts watched rows of telemetry feeds scroll past: speed, altitude, signal interference. The operation had been in planning for months, developed by a small team of engineers and cybersecurity specialists who believed the future of warfare would be fought in frequencies, not front lines. Among them was a quiet young programmer named Olha, who had built the swarm AI that allowed all 200 drones to think as one. She sat beside Petrenko, eyes flicking between monitors. "Swarm cohesion stable at 99.4%, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Petrenko nodded, though he felt the familiar knot of uncertainty twist in his chest. No simulation could predict how Russian radar would react to this scale of intrusion. Hundreds of kilometers away, in a command outpost near Bryansk, Russian radar operators began noticing anomalies. Small, flickering echoes appeared on their screens, too many to count, too symmetrical to be random. Senior Officer Major Chernov squinted at the data. "Birds?" he asked his technician. The younger man shook his head. "No, sir. They're transmitting digital noise. They're mimicking our frequencies." Within minutes, alarms sounded through the facility. Military analysts rushed to identify the intruders. Yet every time they locked onto a signal, it split into 2, then 4. It was as though the air itself was dividing. Back in Ukraine, Petrenko's team monitored the responses in real time. The swarm had reached the perimeter of Russian airspace. "Decoy pattern Delta active," Olha reported. 1,000 invisible threads of data spread out, bouncing off satellites, looping through encrypted relays, confusing tracking systems. Each drone projected a small digital signature of a much larger craft, making the swarm appear like a fleet of aircraft. It was an illusion, pure electronic theater. Far above, at 30,000 feet, the drones glided in eerie silence. The night air thinned, and frost gathered on their wings. The swarm split into coordinated cells, each moving toward a different vector. Some mapped communication towers, others hovered at high altitude, relaying signals back to Kyiv. None carried explosives. Their weapon was information, the kind that could disable a missile system without firing a shot. At 0320, the first contact was made. Russian defense networks activated jamming signals, flooding the sky with electromagnetic noise. The Ukrainian command room went dim as monitors flickered. Olha's fingers flew over her keyboard. Signal disruption at 40%. Correcting algorithms, she said. The swarm adapted instantly, changing flight paths, altering frequencies, learning in real time. The room erupted in a brief cheer. The system worked. But then Petrenko raised his hand. Quiet. We're in their backyard now. In the Russian complex, chaos unfolded in silence. Operators saw phantom aircraft appearing and disappearing. Communication between radar stations broke down. Drones hovered near radar domes, scanning, recording, transmitting. Then, as quickly as they had arrived, they began to retreat, not one crossing deeper into the restricted core of the facility. At dawn, the last drone crossed back over the border and powered down. Petrenko exhaled for the first time in hours. "Recover and decrypt all data," he ordered. The operation had lasted less than 90 minutes but gathered terabytes of information. Engineers would spend weeks analyzing how Russian defenses responded, what frequencies they used, how their radar adjusted. "We didn't hit them," Olha said quietly. "We just showed them we could." Meanwhile, in Moscow, the story took on its own life. State media downplayed the incident, calling it a minor electronic interference event. Yet within the corridors of the Defense Ministry, officials met behind closed doors, debating what had happened. For the first time, they admitted the unthinkable, that their most secure facility had been exposed by machines no larger than seagulls. Days later, international outlets began to report on an unusual swarm movement detected near Russian borders. No one could verify the details, but speculation grew. Analysts in London and Washington described it as a turning point, the first large-scale demonstration of coordinated drone intelligence warfare. Instead of striking physical targets, the operation struck confidence, exposing how even the most guarded systems could be mapped and studied without a single casualty. Petrenko, exhausted, drove home through the quiet suburbs of Kiev that evening. The city lights shimmered against the Dnipro River, peaceful and unaware of what had transpired. He parked his car and sat for a while, watching the sunrise. His phone buzzed, a message from Olha. "They still don't know what happened. We did it." He smiled faintly, but his thoughts were far from victory. He knew that every advance in technology brought a new layer of uncertainty, a new race to adapt. The sky had become a chessboard, and tonight they had moved first. Across the border, Major Chernov stood outside the radar compound, smoking in the cold morning air. He looked up at the pale sky, trying to imagine the invisible swarm that had crossed it hours earlier. He couldn't see it, couldn't hear it, but he could feel the shift, a quiet evolution of warfare that required neither bullets nor explosions, only precision and patience. "The next war," he muttered, "won't need noise." A week later, the recovered data revealed something unexpected. Among the countless radar echoes and jamming signals, the Ukrainian analysts found a gap, a window of 38 seconds, during which the Russian defense grid went completely blind. No radar, no communication, nothing. It was brief, almost imperceptible, but it proved that even the most fortified systems could be breached, however momentarily. Petrenko presented the findings to the Defense Council. They sat in silence as the graphs and timelines scrolled across the screen. "What you're looking at," he said, "isn't an attack. It's the future. Whoever controls the signal controls the sky." The Council approved further research into swarm intelligence and cyber defense strategy. The mission's success remained classified, known only to a handful of officials and engineers. Yet whispers spread through military networks and academic conferences that somewhere in Eastern Europe, a swarm of 200 drones had done the impossible. Months passed. Petrenko returned to his regular duties, though he often revisited that night in his mind. The tension, the silence, the faint hum of machines obeying unseen commands. He realized that power no longer came from firepower, but from information and restraint. True dominance, he thought, lay in being able to act without needing to destroy. As spring arrived, the fields once used for launches filled again with grass. The drones were dismantled, studied, improved. Some would later be repurposed for civilian mapping and agriculture. Technology had no allegiance. It served whoever used it best. Petrenko stood at one of the old launch sites, now silent, and felt the breeze sweep over the land. For a brief moment, he imagined the night sky alive again with that constellation of machines, bright, ordered, alive. Then the image faded, leaving only dawnlight and the distant hum of the world returning to normal. He turned and walked away, carrying the quiet knowledge that somewhere, deep in secure servers, slept the data that had changed everything.